Welcome to Faith Works Live. Here's your host, Rebecca Haney.
Hello and welcome to Faith Works Live. It is such a joy to have you with us. This is my absolute favorite thing in the whole wide world, that we get to talk about the big things, the things that really matter, talk about what it means to live like Christ in this crazy old chaotic, mixed up, and kind of Sodom and Gomorrah world. We've been talking about that quite a bit lately. Maybe Romans 1. Maybe that's a little more diplomatic to say a Romans 1 world, professing to be wise, all kinds of craziness is happening, but never fear. For the Lord remains unchanging, faithful, all-powerful, and on the throne. So let your worries take a rest. If you know Christ, then you can rest easy. But that does not mean that we are to be inactive. I think God calls his people to greater courage now than ever before, perhaps, at least to live in such a time as this. What does that even look like? Glad you asked. That's what we cover here on the show. And it is our great delight to welcome back to our little slice of the airwaves for today, the insights of Dr. Everett Piper. He is a best-selling author. He's a former president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He knows academia. He knows the cultural commentary, and I highly recommend that you follow his work. dreverettpiper.com is his website, and it is our joy to have you back with us. And I'm still pondering some of the stuff that you said last time you were with us because it just goes that deep. Dr. Piper, thanks for being here.
Well, I'm honored to be on your show. And again, I want to forgive anybody who's watching the video. I anticipated audio today. I didn't listen to you, and therefore I'm dressed like I was out working on the farm, which I kind of have been. So forgive me for the appearance.
Are you living the homestead life? Are you off the grid? What's it like for you?
Well, after I retired from the presidency of Oklahoma Wesleyan, we had some play property that we had purchased in the ranch country of Oklahoma. And we decided that we liked it here, so we built a house out here. And I proved I wasn't very smart when I retired. I went out and bought horses and cows.
Sure.
So I'm throwing good money after bad at them right now. So yeah, I am enjoying it.
Good. Well, see, it's not a waste. It's an investment. That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
Apparently,
well, that's a stretch on horses, but hey.
They're wonderful. There's a great joy. I've never owned them, so I can say that. I only know the good from that perspective. But I think one of the big things, I know we'll get into the ponderables that we mentioned, but I think one of the problems that perhaps modern man has in believing in God, in the greatness of God, is that we've so separated ourselves from his creation, from his hands-on creation, and we're surrounded in kind of this pseudo facade of a world that we're around, this constructed reality. And I don't know, maybe it's too broad to say that lends us to thinking that we can be our own gods and that we can construct just about anything. We can deconstruct things and remake them in our own image. I think the further that we get, there's just a grounding that happens when you go out into nature and you see the amazing things that bear the handiwork of their creator. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, actually, you're on a little bit of a stump speech that I used to give to my students when I worked at a Christian university, because one of the constant refrains, and it goes back for decades, it's not new. If you can hear that doorbell, forgive me, because my dog knows how to ring the doorbell.
What a smart pooch.
I'm going to ignore it. Okay. So you all just need to ignore it too. So anyway, when I was responding to my students who would always complain about the bubble, that we live in a bubble at a Christian college, that it's artificial because we have this Christian community that it doesn't reflect the real world. Therefore, it's a bubble. It was a pejorative negative comment that they made. And I would respond and say, what makes this artificial, but yet your concrete jungle with neon signs that you're constantly living in, along with your screen, whether it be your iPhone or whether it be your flat screen and some other purpose, you're living in this world that is totally manufactured, from the concrete that you drive on, to the sidewalks that you walk on, to the signs that you look at on the streets, to the entertainment that you enjoy. None of it is real. None of it is real. So why are you claiming that Christian community is somehow a fake bubble, but yet you're living in a totally contrived plastic concrete world of your own imagination, your own feelings, your own constructs, and that's more real than God's creation of the church and just nature. Obviously, I agree with you. And this claim that the bubble exists within Christian community, but not elsewhere, is just a perfect example of how postmodernity turns all definitions on its head and reverses everything.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly when that started occurring. Obviously, the drive towards calling our own shots goes back as far as the garden, but it really seems like it goes against the grain to such an extent. It's a new revolutionary statement to say, actually, it's not my standard. This whole reality thing is immutable. There are certain things that are objective truth, and that standard exists outside of me, outside of you. You don't get to have your own truth. And I do think there are those two trend lines, those two basic worldviews. There's one that holds such sway in 21st century Western culture, and it is the idea, or I would say the lie, behind this movement that we see towards deconstruction now. I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it does flow from that postmodernity or that instinct, that intellectual drive to claim that all truth is relative, and therefore I can create whatever I say is just as true as whatever your religious book from several thousand years ago says. So why can't my truth claim hold authority? And now it is a war of worldviews to the extent that we understand now. I think the myth of neutrality is gone. I think we do see those two sides at war, and we can't pretend anymore that they can occupy the same space. One is seeking to have mastery over the other.
Spot on. It is a war of worlds. It's a war of reality versus a war of feelings. Ben Shapiro on his show constantly says the facts don't care about your feelings. And that's an offensive, hateful claim, according to postmodernity and according to Gen Z and millennials right now, that if you say, I really don't care about your feelings as much as I care about the facts of this particular situation, whether it be a debate about sexuality or a debate about climate, environment, economics, politics, church, Jesus, your feelings about these things don't define anything. Your feelings are an emotional response to what should be reality. And yes, we are emotional beings. We do have feelings about the daily reality that confronts us. But if we start pretending that we can construct reality on our own, that it doesn't matter what's real. Your gender doesn't matter. Your sex doesn't matter. The definition of Christianity doesn't matter anymore. I can make Christianity up as I go. Now you have become a God unto yourselves. It's radical narcissism. You're worshiping the God you see in the mirror rather than the God that is defined by the Bible. And that is the original sin. We don't want God to tell us what good and evil is any longer. We don't like his definition. So we're going to define it ourselves, declare ourselves to be as God, supplant God from the throne, claim it as our own, and it doesn't end very well. History tells us that this is a bad place for us to go.
And yet we continue. I don't know that I've heard it speculated that the reason they take history out of schools, the reason they de-emphasize anything that happened after like 1960 or so, is so that we will be unable to see the patterns, and so that we'll be easier to redirect. And that's probably a stump speech of mine for another day, because I'm a big advocate of history and studying things so we know where we come from. I think unstudied history is almost guaranteed to be repeated, because we still believe those same old lies. We still get further and further away from the source of the truth, and professing to be wise in our own eyes, we continue to become foolish. And that's not to minimize the struggle that people have with their faith and the searching, the serious soul searching that I think everybody of intellectual honesty can and does have about why we believe the things that we believe, about what is really true. And I do have great respect for people, even if they're currently in a different place than I am when it comes to things like Christianity. If you're being honest and you're honestly searching for the answers to these questions, that's a wonderful place to be. That absolutely, let's take that journey together. But I am seeing a lot of movements, and this transitions towards what we were going to discuss, this movement of deconstructionism. There is a fascinating new book. The name Elisa Childers is very familiar to listeners of this audience. She and Tim Barnett, or known on the internet as Mr. B from Logic, Red Pen Logic with Mr. B. They've written a really popular new book. I'm sure it's a bestseller by now. And it's called The Deconstruction of Christianity. And I saw that you were reading it, and I was like, oh, if there's anybody's thoughts that I want to get on this topic, it's going to be Dr. Everett Piper's. So let's sort through some of the main ideas here and why you find them interesting.
Well, Alyssa Childers speaks from experience, and I respect people who have been there and have turned the corner 180 degrees and have come back to the truth. I respect that politically. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat. He returned to objective normalcy, natural law, laws of nature, nature's God. He became a conservative because he believed in conserving the time-tested principles over and above the new ideas that hadn't been proven by anything. And that's kind of the issue that we have in play right now with regard to the church. I've said this over and over again. It's a little controversial because I am an evangelical. I believe in the evangel, the gospel, the good news of Scripture. I believe that the Bible is inerrant, infallible, authoritative, and true. I believe that the Bible is our measuring rod outside of those things being measured, and it's only by that we can do any measuring. That's a paraphrase of C.S. Lewis. In other words, the Bible, sola scriptura, the Bible is the guide, the definition, the dictionary, the encyclopedia, it's Wikipedia, if you will, on Christianity. You don't get to define Christianity. I don't get to define Christianity. It has been defined by God, the triune God, through his revelation from Genesis to Revelation, and all of the writers that he used to give us his truth with a capital T. That is who I am as a Christian. Now, as I look at the history of the church, I often find that the Catholic Church have more respect for history than evangelicals do. Now, I differ with theological points, some major theological points when it comes to the Catholic Church here, for obvious reasons. But here's one thing I do respect about the Catholic Church. It holds tenaciously to history. It honors 2,000 years of ideas. We can debate those ideas with them on key points of theology, but at least we're debating something that is older than 5 minutes. Right. Evangelicals come up with a new idea that's 5 minutes old, and we chuck everything that has preceded it as if we know everything there is to know about how to define the faith. We might want to take a spoonful of humility and honor the time-tested truths of the history of the church. Does history define Christianity? No, the Bible does. But honoring the wisdom that has preceded us might be worth its while. Honor Aquinas, honor Augustine, honor Calvin, honor some of the more contemporary scholars and sages of the age, such as Chesterton and Lewis. Go back to Spurgeon and look at those that have preached the word and followed Christ tenaciously through persecution, through the loss of property, and through the loss of life, to give us the story of the gospel and the truths of Jesus Christ that we honor today. I do not have the right to contradict the scriptures, and I certainly should have the humility to honor those that preceded me and consider their fight for the truth as part of what it is that we are to defend today. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and 100%. I was thinking, you said Chesterton, and I was thinking of his line about if before you remove a fence, pause long enough. The wise man will pause long enough to consider why the fence was put there in the first place. And I think we're doing that. The term deconstruction is apt because it comes from this notion of disassembling, of what do they say, dismantling. That's the word progressives like to use in a political context a lot. We're going to dismantle all of this infrastructure, all of this, the foundation upon which our society is built, they would say, because it's immoral in its foundation. And I've seen that same type of mentality applied now to organized religion. And I think some of that does come from a place, a genuine place of hurt in each individual. And we can talk about some of how that plays out. But I think the broader urge toward the encouragement of the deconstruction more broadly, especially when you look at places like former Twitter, now X, the X Twitter, everyone jumps on these stories of deconstruction, which then turns towards deconversion. And so there's an intention, you can't ignore, whether or not it's personal for you, you can't ignore this giant movement that is there to tear down all the things upon which our society is built. I mean, if you think, okay, yeah, that's great because we're in a place of injustice, this is so unequal in this world. There's all of these, problems that are happening all the time. We can rebuild it better. We can build back better. Like, I'm not sure you can, though. I'm really I'm really skeptical of that. But also, you're going to tear down everything just because you're uncomfortable with some of the conclusions that occur, instead of changing, reforming, what we have now, working towards the good of everyone. Because I'm not sure that your new society is going to be any more fair. In fact, I'm pretty scared of what that's going to result in.
Well, and we could talk for program after program on deconstruction and Alyssa Childers' book and what she's done in helping us understand it. And I do recommend everybody go out and get the book, because she's an excellent writer and she knows from whence she speaks, because she went through a time of doubt. She was a star within the Christian CCM, Christian music community. What was it? Zoe Girls?
Yep,
she was
I had her albums. Yeah.
And she got exposed to the underbelly, if you will, of evangelical Christianity, and it caused her to stumble for a day or two, or a week or two, or a year or two. But she asked good questions. She didn't trust her feelings. She pursued the facts. And as God honored Jacob for wrestling with him, God will honor all of us for wrestling with him and asking good questions and refusing to let go of truth with a capital T. I really believe that. I've gone through times in my earlier life, and maybe even periodically in my current life, where you think, I just don't get it. I don't understand that. I don't have all the answers. For example, I don't understand the two sides of the coin of God's sovereignty and man's free will. We're not robots. We're not automatons. I don't get it. God knows everything. He's omniscient. He's omnipresent. He's omnipotent. He's sovereign. I don't dispute that. But I also believe that you and I have been charged by God to be free moral agents and respond to the gospel. Can I explain that with my limited mental capacities, with my small little brain? No, I'm not God. So there are times when we just have to, in humility, rest in the tension of God's mystery and in the total truth, and not try to discard or tear down one side of the truth for the sake of my understanding. We wrestle with God. He will honor us as he honored Jacob. We may have a limp after the wrestling match, but that's okay. And I think that's kind of the story of Alyssa Childers as she talks about deconstruction in her own walk. But back to the point, you mentioned that those who are deconstructing, who are critical of traditional, orthodox, biblical, conservative Christianity, often call biblical Christianity immoral. The irony there is they're using Christianity to critique Christianity. True. What standard, what measuring rod, what ruler are you using to define morality? You're using Christian morality to call Christian failure immoral. Okay, that's what you're doing. The social justice warriors, they call for justice. Well, there is no justice without a judge. If you don't have a judge without a capital J, there is no justice, because we all become little gods unto ourselves, and we live in chaos. So those who are arguing against biblical justice are ultimately, without realizing, or at least admitting it, using biblical justice to refute biblical justice. It's like they're saying, I can't tolerate your intolerance. It's a self-refuting claim. I hate those hateful people. I'm sure that nothing is sure. I know nothing can be known. I'm absolutely confident there are no absolutes. And we've got to have justice because there is no judge. This makes no sense. It's like sawing off the branch upon which you sit. And culture is collapsing right now as the result of that.
See, we come to you for good news. Dr. Everett Piper is our excellent guest today. 1,000% true, everything that you just said. Sometimes you just got to smile and laugh about it, as Rome burns, I suppose. But the struggle that we have, and that's not to say that I'm without hope. So we'll get to hope, but by the end of our conversation too. I do have great empathy for and sympathy for people that find themselves in a very that have had very painful experiences with Christian people, or with Christian, air quotes, people with the church, because there's a lot of sin that has been that should have been repented, that should have been dealt with firmly, and hasn't, and has gone under the rug. There have been abuses that have taken place, horrible abuses in the name or under the guise of covered by the churches. And so we absolutely call out any sin that the Bible calls sin. and seek to call anyone to repentance and to reconciliation, to wholeness in Christ. But there is, I think, a certain amount of glee every time I hear these deconstruction stories that people do on public platforms. So it's not typically, two individuals having a private conversation about some of these faith struggles. It's usually broadcast to the world, like, oh, so-and-so used to be a Christian author or a Christian artist, and now they've decided they really don't believe anymore. There's no such thing as hell. Love wins in the end. We've got all of these, after they made their thousands/millions by selling to a Christian audience, suddenly they discover they didn't really believe in the first place, or, they've evolved. We hear that too. And I think there is this general trend toward tearing down anything that supports Christ. And then you have Christians that are so concerned that they will appear intolerant or unloving, or that they're not believing the story of these people, that we then in turn react emotionally. And I think a certain amount of emotional kindness and compassion towards those who are searching is important. But I also think we would be foolish to ignore the overall strategy that the enemy is employing here against what God calls is right and just and true. Everything that you just said, we still continue to stand for. None of that is the hurtful part to people. I think it's when the gospel of Christ is subverted or used in selfish ways, in sinful ways. And in that case, it's a false gospel, that Jesus is not to blame for the acts that people have done in his name.
My dad, I'm trying to remember what I talked about on your show the last time, so if any of it's a repeat, forgive me. I don't think I shared this. My dad, when I was growing up, was not a believer. He was a good man. He was a hardworking man. I don't even remember him engaging in bathroom humor, if you will, when I was growing up. But he didn't accept Christ, and he made that clear. However, in the later years of his life, he underwent heart surgery, and I flew. It was my first year out of college, and I was on a business trip, and I flew back to the hospital because he was there. He was going to go under bypass surgery, and I went in kind of grudgingly, because maybe I shouldn't admit this, but witnessing to your dad is hard. And I really didn't want to, but I knew I had to. So I went in and I asked my dad before he went into surgery. I said, "Dad, do you want to talk about your faith?" And I expected him to say, no, enough of that. And he looked at me and he said, "Sure, I guess. But the difficulty I have is with hypocrisy, all those Christians." And by God's grace, I didn't anticipate it. I just responded this way. I said, "Dad, it's about time you stopped looking at Christians and started looking at Christ." And it was that simple admonition. Stop looking at the failure and criticizing the hypocrites. Look at Christ, the objective truth. I didn't go into all this theology, but the Word made flesh and dwelling among us. The great I am, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb of God, who has proven his deity and his identity by his resurrection. Stop looking at me and my failure. Stop looking across the street at the pastor who is living a hypocritical life. And by the way, sidebar, my dad owned a gas station, and a Methodist pastor used to come into that gas station and tell my dad dirty jokes. Okay? It was that kind of Christian behavior that caused my dad to step away from the faith. But he accepted Jesus before he went into surgery and lived the last 10 years of his life as an obedient Christian, because he started looking at the objective measuring rod of Christianity rather than his feelings, his disappointment, his emotion about hypocrisy. He recognized that his feelings didn't matter. Jesus did. And I think all of us, whether you're going through deconstruction or whether you're critical of the hypocrisy that you see when you look out your window, we need to remember that look in the mirror, and what you see in the mirror is not God. You see a broken human being who is sinful in and of yourself. And the only way we can correct any of the hypocrisy or the injustices or the hate or the lack of love, whatever it is that we're disappointed with when we look out the window and see the world around us, we have nothing to base our criticism or our anxiety on if we don't go back to the objective measuring rod of Christianity, the truth of Christ and the truth of Scripture. It's the only basis that we can criticize people or ourselves for being intolerant or unloving, because there has to be some standard upon which we're measuring those things. Otherwise, it's just a matter of your power versus mine. I was on the O'Reilly Factor a few years ago. Bill O'Reilly is a shark. I was a little intimidated to go on his show. And he wanted to talk about religious freedom and the church's stand against gay marriage at the time. That was working its way through the courts. And of course, conservative Christians were saying, no, we don't believe in this. And Mr. O'Reilly asked me on his show, he said, Dr. Piper, what about tolerance? Now, I think he was playing devil's advocate. My guess is Mr. O'Reilly probably agreed with 99% of what I said and what I was going to say. But I looked Mr. O'Reilly in the face and I said, Mr. O'Reilly, on your anniversary, did you send your wife an I tolerate you card? And there was a pregnant pause. He didn't say anything. And I think I kind of realized subconsciously I had him, because you could rarely get O'Reilly to shut up.
Sure.
During that pause, I said, I'm guessing you probably didn't, because had you sent your wife an I tolerate you card, it wouldn't have ended very well, because tolerance is not a compliment. Tolerance is not a superior virtue. Tolerance says, I don't love you necessarily. I may not even like you, but I'll tolerate you. Whereas Christian charity, love, Mr. O'Reilly, is a superior virtue. Tolerance says I could care less. Do what you want. Love says I care a lot. I care deeply, enough to stand in your way and say, stop if you're hurting yourself. Yes. And every parent, I hear your children in the background right now. Every parent understands what I'm saying right now is true, because when your child is going toward a burning stove, you say no, because you love your child enough not to let them damage themselves and burn their hand. If your child is even worse, running out of the front yard into the road to play, a good parent stands in their child's way and says, no, don't do that. You don't tolerate or affirm your child when they're running toward a burning stove or an onrushing car. A good parent loves their child and disciplines their child so that the child is not hurt. But we're told in Scripture that the Lord disciplines those he loves. There is this false dichotomy of discipline and love, that if you believe in rules and restrictions, and if you're intolerant, and if you're not affirming, then you're not loving. No, it's a false dichotomy. There are two sides of the coin of God's grace in our lives, of love. And the Lord disciplines us while he loves us. They're not two separate things. They're one and the same in terms of good parenting. A good heavenly father and a good earthly father understands the same.
Yeah. And I have so many thoughts that while you just said that, which is a brilliant exposition, I think, but we don't understand authority. We've gotten so far from, and I think the devil is intentionally attacking the family unit, attacking healthy government structure and healthy community, attacking the church, as he always has. But all of those things, there's so many lessons that we would learn, so many understandings of reality that we would gain from healthy families, from healthy communities and church structure. And God designs these things so beautifully, these institutions, to show us more of his nature, to help us understand, to help guide us, and to help grow us into who he's always created us to be. And so it's no surprise that we see this concerted attack and deconstruction on all these many fronts. So that was one thought that I had, God's wisdom in his design. And I think hopefully our humility in getting back to some of those designs so we can understand how more of who he is, and benefit from that, and to have some more abundant life instead of this, halfway dragging zombie existence that so many of us have settled for. And then my other thought, as you said that, was that we've moved beyond tolerance towards affirmation. And even you in your description, we understand that. So again, the chief irony that there's all of these folks that are saying, hey, you have to throw off all the rules and the definitions, and you're intolerant, you're hateful, you're a bigot, because you won't let me live life by my terms and my definitions. Now they're the ones that are willing to cancel you if you don't not just tolerate, but openly affirm and celebrate what I say is true. I just saw a clip from a video that was making the rounds. I think Libs of TikTok shared it and some other places. But it was instructional video from charter schools in California. So not public schools, but charter schools. And it was about their tolerance propaganda, and it was supposed to be in an teachers in an office setting, and there was someone that identified as trans or identified as she but was actually he, and that was revealed in the course of this discussion. And there was one man that called him by the actual pronoun. And so it was a battle of pronouns, and the instruction that was given was very clear. He says something like, it's just basic biology. And they said, no, it's rude. It's offensive. You're not allowed to call, that person has the right to be called her or she. And that's the wording that you use. And he said, well, that's just, that's not what I believe. And you can't ask me to, I have the right to my beliefs, was the comeback in the script. And they said, we're not asking you to change your beliefs, but we're asking you to keep those private. We're asking you to keep those to yourself, because you have to call, literally, they said this, you are required to call someone by the terms that they choose. You have to keep your beliefs to yourself. You're not changing them, but you are supposed to keep them private. They should have no bearing. And I think they're just kind of saying the quiet part out loud.
Well, okay. I think what you did is you just summarized the broken worldview of postmodernity and wokeism and radical tolerance, radical affirmation. First of all, it can't sustain itself. One of the things you just pointed out is that those who call for radical tolerance don't tolerate you or me. So it's a self-refuting worldview. It cannot sustain itself. If you demand that everybody be affirmed, but yet you won't affirm me in my biblical worldview that there's an objective right and wrong, then you have automatically put yourself in the problem category, because you're committing the very sin that you're trying to eradicate from society. You're being intolerant. You're being less than affirming of those that you disagree with. So it doesn't sustain itself. And just a few logical questions, like Jesus's style of apologetics when he was confronted by an adversary was often just to ask a simple rhetorical question. And it wasn't because he didn't know the answer. He's the Son of God. He is omniscient. He knew the answer. He could have defeated anybody in a debate. But often he just asked, well, whose face is on the coin? Or why do you call me Lord? Or do you want to pick up the first stone? And then the man who knows everything, the God man who knows everything past and eternal into the future, shuts up, and he lets the broken worldview of his adversary collapse as they walk away. And we should do the same when we're confronting deconstruction or the self-refuting claims of intolerance and affirmation and the crazy unscientific views of trans ideology. Just ask simple questions. Can you tolerate my intolerance? Shut up. Don't interrupt the uncomfortable quietness that, like when I asked Mr. O'Reilly, did you send your wife an I tolerate you card? I really don't have to say much more, because the lunacy of that question exposes the brokenness of the worldview in play. We need to just ask questions. We don't want to get red-faced and angry. We attack the idea, not the person. And then we be quiet, have the confidence in the truth behind your question to let it win the day rather than you win the argument. That's one of the strategies that I think we need to employ as we engage the culture around us. But you're spot on. And part of I've pointed this out, and I've never had it fail. So my culture where I live in Oklahoma is ranching country. There are more cattle than there are people in the county in which I live.
That's God's country.
It is. So when I drive from my house to the Tulsa airport to go speak at someplace, I drive through all these ranches, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 acre ranches with thousands and thousands of cows. Now, I've asked people out here when I speak, have you ever seen one of those cows arguing with another? And they act like, what are you at? I say, no, you don't see cattle having a debate. They don't do podcasts. They don't do talk radio. They don't write papers.
Yeah.
They don't argue because they're not the imago Dei. A human being, a man and a woman, is made in the image of God. God has put his thumbprint of moral awareness on our souls. And we do argue and debate. It's part of who we are in the image of God. We're not the imago dog. We are the imago Dei. We're not the imago dog. We're not made in the image of an animal. We're not governed by our desires, our libido, if you will. If you're a believer in Christ, if you've been born again, you're governed by your Lord, not your libido. You're defined by your deity, Jesus Christ, not your desires. Your identity is not the sum total of your inclinations. Now, my dogs and my cows and my horses, they are defined by their gut, their libido, their belly, their desires. That is the nature of an animal. Now, you point out that difference in those terms, and people often get it. They may not agree with you and become converted to Orthodox Christianity immediately, but what they do see is the brokenness of their deconstruction of the orthodoxy, the biblical worldview, the natural law, the common sense, because sense that is common is all around us. They see that. Another, and I'll take a breath here, is Chesterton.
You're on a roll. I won't stop a man when he's on a roll.
You play off of, okay, Chesterton, the man was brilliant. None of us can spar with Chesterton. He said, when you get rid of the big laws of God, you don't get liberty. You get thousands and thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum. That's my paraphrase, but that's close. So what's he saying? Chesterton is saying, okay, people, you refuse to live by 10 simple laws. That's all God gave you, 10. And frankly, Jesus summarized them in 2. So you won't live by 10 or 2 simple laws. So what do you get as the consequence of that decision? You get reams upon reams upon reams of little laws from Washington, D.C. or your state capital, rushing in to fill the vacuum to tell you how to do everything. I mean, that's how absurd getting rid of the big laws of God for these thousands and thousands of little laws of men really is. And the result of that is not the freedom that deconstructionists claim they get, because you're going to be restricted by all of these little laws, these laws that cancel you, these laws that won't tolerate you, these laws that say you can't say that, you can't use the bathroom the way you want to use the bathroom any longer. There is no such thing as an objectively defined pronoun. And if you use the wrong words, not behave the wrong way, but if you use the wrong words, you will suffer the consequences, even legally therein. Now, you tell me, is that a freer society and a freer culture and nation than what we had before? Absolutely not. Chesterton was spot on. You tear down the 10 simple laws, and you're going to get a gazillion little laws that replace them. You'll lose your freedom.
And the tyranny that results from that. And suddenly you're at the mercy. Then it's almost a self-fulfilling kind of situation too, because then you're looking to government as authority, being the creatures that we are, like it or not, that we're always looking for some sort of authority. And now there's so many people that cry out to the government, the people that claim they want to be free of all of these rules that God had given them. They now look to the government to dictate every single little aspect of their lives. If the government says put on a mask, then I put on a mask. If it says I have to walk this way versus that way, or I have to say this word instead of that word, I can see that instinct, and I can see how misdirected and how twisted that's become. And I know that's probably a soapbox for another day. So if I sound taller, it's because I was about to climb up on a soapbox.
But here's another key point in what you just said. Human beings will ultimately follow a leader. A vacuum always gets filled. It won't sustain itself. So if you take organized religion out of the equation, if you take the church out of the equation, if you take the laws of nature and nature's God out of the equation, if you take the church and Christianity out of the equation, you're not going to have a value neutral society. Value neutrality is a ruse. It's a lie. It cannot sustain itself. Something will rush in to fill the vacuum. And the great theologian Bob Dylan told us of this when he said, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to serve somebody. We will all follow the leader. It will either be God or it will be the government. You're not going to live in a value neutral world. It doesn't exist.
You're being very generous with your time, Dr. Piper. And for those of you who aren't familiar with his work, well, today's your lucky day. You can get caught up on his best-selling books. He's got Grow Up, Life Isn't Safe, But It Is Good, and Not a Daycare. Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas. He's got all kinds of great content, podcasts as well. If you want your podcasts, he's got your podcast. So check out his work. Follow him on X as well. And before we go, Dr. Piper, I would love to get your thoughts on this recent I don't know if you call it a trend. I would say it's definitely a popular accusation against Christians in the who dare to speak of their values in the public sphere, that all of us are now Christian nationalists. And that's kind of this big boogeyman sort of term that we're supposed to run and cower and shake and hide, being called a Christian nationalist. And I think this really hit home with a lot of Christians it was some MSNBC pundit, I'm afraid I don't know her name. And she was saying, she defined this or equated Christian nationalism with saying, the crazy thing, this slight paraphrase, but not really. If I can find the clip, I'll put it in. And she basically says, if they believe their rights come from God, these Christians believe their rights come from God, that they're immutable and not government. And that makes them Christian nationalists, that they believe that God's version of truth and right and wrong should, have some authority in the public sphere, and that we should have laws that reflect that. And that makes you a Christian nationalist. Cue the scary music, dun, dun, dun. And so I would love to get your feedback. If you are presented with such a claim, how and then they turn the mic on you, how would you respond?
Well, interesting. I've been involved in this debate in the last 24 hours. There's a pastor, and I believe he's a Bible-believing pastor. I don't think he's from some progressive church that denies the deity of Jesus Christ or is non-Trinitarian or anything like that. But he's in this camp that has bought this lie that if you're a patriotic, civically minded, engaged Christian who believes that a biblical worldview should be salt and light to a culture that's rotting and dark, that you as a Christian have the obligation to step into culture and argue like William Wilberforce did against the slave trade, or do what Martin Luther King Jr. did and argue for civil rights for African Americans and everybody, regardless of the color of your skin.
Sure.
Or if you're like Harriet Tubman and you stand against slavery in the United States and you help liberate blacks as they're fleeing the South and trying to use the Underground Railroad to get to the North. If you're a Christian, which these people were, and you're doing something within culture to solve its problems, then today you're the problem, because you're breaking down the wall of separation between church and state. I had a pastor telling me this yesterday. And I said to him, first of all, you should know that the wall of separation is extra constitutional at best. It is not in the Constitution, because this pastor claimed it was. I said, it's not.
It's not.
It is extra constitutional. It's Thomas Jefferson promising the Danbury Baptists that the government would stay out of their business, not vice versa. And I'm going to say that again. Jefferson was very clear. He was promising these nervous evangelical Bible-believing Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, don't worry, the government will not intrude into your business. There's a wall separating you from the state, and that wall protects you from them monkeying in your business, not vice versa. That's what he's saying. So I told this pastor, number one, you know that. If you don't, you should. And number two, what is it? You define Christian nationalism. I want to hear your definition. And he said coercion, forced conversions, legal penalties if you're not a believer. I said, nobody in their right mind is arguing for that. I said,
No.
you give me one credible. I find some crackpot out there in, the backwoods of Oklahoma that's arguing for forced conversions, but that is not what these people that are throwing around the accusation of Christian nationalism mean. Oh, I would disagree with that guy. I don't believe in forced conversions. I'm not arguing for penalties if you're not a believer. I'm not suggesting that my dad, who was a good moral man, a truck driver who took care of his family, should be penalized for not accepting Christ. Absolutely not. And I said to this pastor, you show me one credible Christian leader that's arguing for this coercion that you're saying is being broken down by Christian nationalists like myself. Couldn't answer, because there is none. And I went back at him again. I said, you can't answer because you can't find anybody. And you might come up with some crackpot, but that's not what I asked. I said, give me evidence of one credible Christian thinker, Christian leader who's arguing that somehow there should be forced Christianity within the United States of America. But the left, the progressives, as they always do, they've changed the definitions. They commit the straw man fallacy over and over again. They'll construct this scarecrow, this scary straw man, and then they'll flail away at this creature of their own making that isn't real. And that's what's going on with Christian nationalist claims right now. Because you and I and any biblical Christian who believes we have the responsibility to fulfill the Great Commission and go into all the world telling all nations that the gospel of Jesus Christ will save them from their sins and then teach them to obey Jesus as the result of that. When we say that to all nations, including the United States of America, we're now Christian nationalists. Or how about this one? The Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, be done on earth. Are we not supposed to work for the kingdom of God?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't define the kingdom of God as forced conversion. It's a ruse. It's a straw man argument. There's no such thing as people arguing for that. And we need to point that out when we get into this debate.
100%. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I care about my nation. But the fact that I believe that my rights come from God, as did like every single one of our founders, according to their writings, essentially, except maybe Thomas Paine, but he would have used natural law with different language. So barring him, like every man and woman that had the influence in the founding of this nation believed that. And you cannot escape that. You can disagree with that, but you're going to have to make a better argument than the straw man and the false equivalence that you're describing, Dr. Piper.
Even Thomas Jefferson, they'll say, well, Thomas Jefferson wasn't a born-again believer. Maybe he wasn't. I mean, I understand the debate there. Thomas Jefferson, in his first inaugural address as president of the United States, said that he was bound to give Christianity sanction. Why? Because Christianity was the only religion in Thomas Jefferson's mind that would serve as the glue to hold this new nation together.
Wow.
He was bound to give it sanction. Now, was he arguing for forced conversions? No, because he may not have been a believer himself. Was he arguing for penalties if you don't declare a Bible-believing born-again testimony? No, but he recognized Christianity, the gospel, the words of Jesus Christ, the goodness in that salt and in that light. He was bound to give that sanction because it would be the only foundation upon which this nation could be built.
Yeah, it's hard to be better said than that. It reminds me, if you have time for a 60-second story, I got into a debate with an atheist at our Iowa State Capitol here a couple of weeks ago. And it was sort of impromptu, but it was there was a pro-life rally planned in the rotunda where we were praying publicly. And then there happened to be a debate about basically a gender definition bill. And so you had the whole rainbow crowd coming to, gather in the halls, and they had their chants that they were saying. And then we had our prayers and our songs that we were singing about protecting life and equal justice in our state. So it was a fun crowd. It was an interesting combination. But they thought we were there to protest their bill when it was actually two different things. And they wouldn't have liked the other thing that we were standing for either, primarily. But they were trying to shout us down. And what they were shouting was separation of church and state, over and over again. And I actually talked to one of the ladies that was kind of speaking disparagingly towards me and the crowd. And she said, well, you shouldn't be here to push your religion on us. I said, well, you have the right to be here. And I'm an Iowan. I have the right to be here in my state capital and speak and talk about what I believe freely. And she said, well, you can't push your religion on me. It's separation of church and state. It's in the First Amendment. And I said, actually, it's not. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. And so we sat there Googling the text of the First Amendment, and she read it completely differently. So she went to this atheist's table where they had literature about there. The Free Thinkers Association was prominent with rainbow flags and everything. And they were saying, well, so we got into this big debate, the atheist representative and I, about the separation of church and state, the historicity, exactly as you said, that it's not in the Constitution. I said, I think you and I both agree that rights have to come from somewhere. He said, no, there's no such thing as inherent rights. So he believed that rights only come from government. I said, that is a very scary contention. It truly is. And he happened to be someone that, is not as pasty as I am. And he said, well, the Constitution said that I was 3/5 of a person. And is that right? I said, no, absolutely not. It was a denigration of your dignity, of your equal rights, or your great, 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 great grandfathers, whoever might be present. And I said, this is exactly why I think what you're standing on is an unequal standard of justice, and a very scary standard at that. If you're saying we have no rights other than what government dictates to us and what government grants to us, then just 51% of a vote of a populace can declare that you're not a human being. And that's not what the standard of actual law says. That's not what God's law or natural law would say. And it's not what's in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator. And therein lies the Pact of the United States. That's the foundation upon which we sit. And to say that it's better to toss all of that aside because you reject God, that therefore popular opinion can decide whether or not you're fully human, I think we've gone backwards. I don't think that's progressive.
Well, what he demonstrated is what we've been talking about. Christianity is not the dirt, it's the soap. Christianity is not the disease, it's the cure. Because what he was arguing for is that there is no such thing as a self-evident truth. There is no such thing as a truth, a law that's given by God versus government. He was arguing that government defines these things. Well, again, the self-refuting nature here is that the government defined him as less than a full person. It was only God's natural law that Martin Luther King Jr. referenced in his letter from the Birmingham jail that justified breaking an unjust law. That's what Martin Luther King was asked. What gives you the right to break the law? He said, we are obligated to obey just laws. And how do you define a just law? It's a law of nature. It's given by nature's God. And how do you define an unjust law? It's a law that runs contrary to that revelation of God. It's not defined by the government. Because when the government starts defining things, when man starts defining truth, it becomes subjective and it becomes a quest for power. And the government can tell you and me or anybody else, you're not a full person. And we're going to penalize you for that. That's a very scary place to go. And frankly, the First Amendment, it calls for two things. That the government cannot establish religion. In other words, it can't establish a church that you have to worship in.
Right.
And number two, it cannot prohibit the free expression thereof. So anyone trying to prohibit your expression of religion in the public square is out of sync with the First Amendment. Period. That's the end of it.
So much wisdom, and I know you have other things to do. You got horses and dogs, and I have kids in the background, and a generous husband who's been watching them for an hour. It is just a delight. I don't want the conversation to end. I know reality of time and space, it has to, but I so appreciate your insights and the boldness, the courage with which you speak. So would you be willing to end on just a note of encouragement? Just everything that we mentioned, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be nodding their heads and thinking, yes, this is true. Yes, this is right. We can't lose this in America. But then when it comes to speaking up, they suddenly, find reasons why we can't, or why it's difficult. Not to, my listeners are better than most, but it can be difficult to be courageous when it seems like the whole world is trying to shout you down and tell you you're the crazy one. And we're almost in that Orwellian moment now, where it seems like we're in this constant present where we're not allowed to talk about what happened, and we get silenced by the the Ministry of Truth, and this has become a problem. Everything that's up is down and down is up in the world around us. So how do we stand firm in the courage of conviction as Christians today?
I just read the transcript to a new book that's coming out by David Kohlberg. It's not out yet. I was just reading his transcript, and it's the working title is The Church Courageous. David Kohlberg is arguing that we might want to read Revelation differently. And he's not arguing that it's not prophetic at all, but he's arguing that we have bought into rescue theology more than church courageous theology, that we're going to lose everything until the rapture, and we just ought to hunker down and get ready. He argues that's not consistent with the Great Commission. It's not consistent with the Lord's Prayer. It's not consistent with what Jesus told his apostles that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church. And I had an epiphany because I never thought of it the way Kohlberg describes that particular admonition of Jesus to his disciples. The gates of hell is a defensive description. You put up gates to keep something out. Gates are not an offensive posture, they're a defensive position. So when he says the gates of hell will not prevail, he's calling upon the church to go on the attack. That as you accost, as you storm the citadel, the gates of hell will not prevail. You will win. Now, here's one thing I know about that. Jesus is God. He's not going to break his promise. You can take that promise to the bank. The gates of hell are not going to prevail against the church. Stop being defensive. Go on the offense, again, in a godly, born-again fashion, but don't cower. Get some courage. Be bold and courageous, Joshua, and be steadfast and immovable. I think that's 2 Corinthians 5:38 or 58. Paul tells us be steadfast and immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And Joshua says be bold and courageous. So get some courage, grow a spine, be steadfast, don't be moved, and recognize that those gates are there to defend against the attack of the church. Go on the offense. Jesus told us we win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen. Again, I think that's probably like 17 times that I've said that, but it's true. There's so much truth here, Dr. Piper. I really appreciate your time. It's always a blessing to learn from your insights, and the way you put things is indeed insightful. So thank you for sharing your apples of gold with us today. And let's just let the lion out of his cage. Isn't that the fantastic illustration? Was it Spurgeon that said that, or was it Moody? I forget exactly who to attribute that to. So
I don't know who said it, but think of C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. The great lion Aslan is not safe, but he's good. Let him out of his cage.
Just let him out, and he could defend himself very well. Oh, man. Until next time, because we have like probably 100 hours worth of questions that I could ask you in order to better understand. But I know you have a dog that rings a doorbell, so we should talk about that next time. Sorry. How do you train a dog to ring a doorbell?
I could share.
Other practical advice with Dr. Everett Piper. I will put his website down below so you can check out his books, follow his podcast, and his fascinating thoughts on X as well. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in, for being with us, for exploring these questions. If this has been encouraging, challenging to you, I would love to hear your feedback as well. Comment down below, and check out the podcast, Apple, iTunes, Google Play, wherever you get your podcast stuff. Spreaker, we're on there, and a whole bunch of other places I didn't know exist, but we're there. So hi, nice to see you from wherever you're listening, right from here in the heart of Iowa. I so appreciate your being with us today and being a part of this adventure. We couldn't do it without you. So until next time, we have a mission to fear God, to love people, and to live free.
If you've ever wondered what love looks like, check out Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. They offer free services to help women make informed decisions and prepare for their futures. In particular, in a situation of an unplanned pregnancy, women need to know that the truth about their bodies. They need to know the truth about their babies and all of their options. And they'll find that at Agape Pregnancy Resource Center. Go to agapedsm.com and find ways that you can get involved in this amazing ministry, whether it's free pregnancy testing, STD testing, free ultrasounds and counseling, not to mention practical resources, hygiene items, parenting classes, just the list goes on. They change lives. This is a place that truly helps people. And if you care about the women in our community, check out agapedsm.com and click on Get Involved today.
Hey, what's for dinner? If you're like me, I hear that 15 times a day. And fortunately, I have a plan. It's typically Anonymous beef at our house. We are such big fans of Anonymous beef at the Haney home because it's just great quality beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It's naturally raised butcher beef. They sell by the quarter, the half, or the whole, and they support your local meat lockers so they can help you get it processed in a way that works for you. In this economy, it's good to have affordable options for your meat. And if you're willing to make a good investment in your nutrition for a healthy menu plan, I highly recommend Anonymous Beef. Contact Dave and Mary Lynn at anonymousbeef.com. They welcome your questions. They'll help get you on the schedule. They have locker dates coming up. Don't wait. Secure your locker date today. Go to anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at verigard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service, you can trust VeriGuard. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they are dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org, and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to Intervisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help. From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, Intervision serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve, that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at Intervisions Healthcare Clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at intervisionshealthcare.org. That's intervisionshealthcare.org. And you can call 24 hours a day at 515-440-CARE. That's 515-440-2273.